And I just do it by pure love of cinema.
So there's a kind of coincidence between discovering Dune and starting to dream of making films.
Do you remember the first Denis Villeneuve film you ever saw? I do. It was Prisoners. And at the time, I had no idea what I was watching, what I was getting into. And after I got off the ride, I took no note of the director. My reaction was different to what it might be these days. It was 2013, and I didn't think about films the way I do today. The film gripped me, moved me even, but I didn't rush to Google to learn more about the director or seek out similar films. I walked away thinking. And that's the way in which I want to begin this piece. Thinking. A novel concept, huh? I read books and watch movies all the time. Sometimes I love them. Sometimes I hate them. Sometimes a great work of art leaves you with a fantastic, even memorable experience, but doesn't make you think. And on the other end of the spectrum, a flawed work can leave you with contemplation for days. So how do you weigh the value? Is one greater than the other? In art, it's hard to ever draw those lines between the good and bad because everyone perceives things differently. Sure, there are varying levels of technical competence that can determine quality, but past that, things get more confusing, more up to interpretation. That's the place where we begin to study Denis Villeneuve and why interpretation is important. Because Denis handles the technical side of film production with such elegance as to blow many of his peers out of the water. Not only do his films look and sound amazing, but they also feel amazing. Further, the more films he releases, the more cemented his signature style becomes. The closer he comes to finding his own directorial niche, the stronger the case for his undeniable talent grows. I would even claim he's already found it. Denis doesn't make blockbuster films. At least, not in the usual sense. His films don't look like Mission Impossible, James Bond, Marvel, thank God, or any other summer smashes. But Denis' films are cinema. Don't get me wrong, it's not my intent to tear down summer blockbusters. I love those too. Only, I think there are some important distinctions between cash cows and what Denis makes. That doesn't mean he hasn't seen financial success either, because he undoubtedly has. And his opportunity to direct the adaptation of Frank Herbert's Dune is a testament to that. That said, it only requires one look at his take on Bladerunner 2049 to see why his work doesn't always captivate the casual viewer. I distinctly recall raving to my fiancée about the greatest film of 2017 before popping that bad boy on the TV to find her verdict on Blade Runner 2049 disappointing at best. I believe her words were, "I know you loved that movie, but I thought it was kinda boring." While I remained glued to the screen, hanging on every gorgeous shot composition, wishing my eyes could breathe in the beauty for just a few more seconds, she was bored. So before I go off and claim Denis Villeneuve is the greatest director since the 2000s, here's your disclaimer. Everyone has opinions and you don't have to agree, but I'm going to talk about art I love for a little while, which is my favorite thing to do. So if you're all in, sit back, take a breath, and I hope you feel something. This is Dune and Denis Villeneuve, a career on the tightrope. And before we get too deep, I just want to say thank you guys for being here. Thank you for checking out this video. And if you enjoy content like this, hit that like button and feel free to subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out a lot over here. So thanks. To be clear, this isn't a Dune Part 1 review. In fact, I think a review does a disservice to the film, and I will stand by my opinion that Dune was labeled in the opening title as Part 1 for a reason, and is in fact not a complete movie. And all reviews would do great respect to hold their verdicts until Part 2 has released. I would normally complain and blame the director for Dune ending too soon, or not telling a remotely complete story. But I think we all know if Denis could release a 5-hour film that worked through the entirety of Frank Herbert's source material, he would have. But that's not how Hollywood, production studios, or money works. So unfortunately, we have to take what we're given in these circumstances. In a world dominated by Marvel's TV-esque copy and paste blockbuster formulas, I can only be thankful that a visionary like Denis is allowed to take a crack at something so big and expensive in the science fiction world. There are a number of other perfectly capable, amazing directors that could have taken on Dune. But if they had, we would have received a very different movie. Maybe even a great one still, but I can't help thinking the legacy might not last the way Denis' vision might. Denis isn't the only director trying to toe the line between blockbuster draw and cinematic masterpiece, and his method isn't the only one. Steven Spielberg is a master of the cinematic blockbuster, and Christopher Nolan is on the shortlist for just about every accolade you can think of. What strikes me as unique about Villeneuve's fervor for the artistic side can be summed up with one word: uncompromising. And Denis' vision for Dune is uncompromising in every way he could manage through strength alone. But that's all speculative. Let's talk about what is. I said this isn't a Dune review, but I also have to admit I don't even know how much or how long it will take me to really talk about Dune specifically at any molecular level, because I think context is important. And frankly, there are hundreds of pieces on the internet to take Dune apart. I'm sure you can do a quick YouTube search and find someone far more obsessed with the source material than me, taking apart every Easter egg, book-to-film comparison, or even breaking down story structure. I'll be honest for a moment, so bear with me. When I sit down to write a new piece, I constantly feel inadequate to properly convey my thoughts and feelings, let alone critique or, simply put, teach you guys anything about books, films, or story. Because every day, no matter how much I grow, I still feel like a kid in a wide world. And every time I think I've figured it out, the landscape changes and a new world beckons to humble me. So I find the best way to approach these pieces is to tell you guys about the things I love most. The things that filled me with wonder or made me think, or more importantly, made me a better artist. In short, Denis Villeneuve made me a better artist. So let's roll back the clocks and start near the beginning. Villeneuve has been in the industry since 1994. He's been making films since the early 2000s, and his filmography is no small feat to consume and analyze in any detail. To do so would frankly exhaust both me and you, so I'm going to draw the magnifying glass to his English films, the ones I connected with most. Unfortunately, foreign films aren't widely popular in America, and thus his movies prior to 2013 may have gone unnoticed by a large population of American viewers. I've been trying to watch more foreign language films recently and have a deep appreciation for them. But if I'm being honest, Denis' American films were my introduction to his work and still remain the stories that most captivated me. So let's start in 2013. Prisoners, starring Jake Gyllenhaal, Hugh Jackman, and Viola Davis, was a successful film by all metrics. It was nominated for an Oscar. I mean, Roger Deakins, come on, of course it was. And maintains an impressive Rotten Tomatoes score. Not that anyone cares what Rotten Tomatoes says, right?
Not me.
And it also made money, which unfortunately is one of the most important parts of making movies. That said, you don't hear much about it anymore. Honestly, I don't remember hearing much about it when it came out either. It wasn't unsuccessful, but also didn't catapult Denis to American stardom. By all metrics, he had already garnered significant respect in the industry, and his previous films made impressive waves. But by casual viewer metrics, Denis obviously hadn't reached the star power he wields today. But enough about everyone else. What about me? Statistics, public perception, all that garbage aside, Prisoners presented me with a spark. To this day, Prisoners is one of the most personal, emotionally charged films in Denis' filmography. It's brooding, reserved, contained. Roger Deakins received prestigious award nominations for cinematography, yet even that's understated. Don't get me wrong, it's still amazing, but the film isn't flashy. The craft is impeccable on many levels, but there's no showmanship. The film sucks you into the story and holds you there, only utilizing the most tasteful techniques to keep you hooked. It's an emotional ride from start to finish, but it never takes the time to say, "Look at me, I'm a movie." It simply sucks you in. You're here for the story, for the characters, not the movie. Does that make sense? It does in my head.
Not crazy! Not crazy!
It's the type of film that hits you no matter who you are, or maybe it just hits me. I don't know. But the premise of abducted children and parents losing their minds to find them really hits the spot for me. I don't have children of my own, but I want them. And the sympathy I feel with Hugh Jackman's character when he screams, when he sobs, when he trembles, when he's on the brink of losing it, when he'll do anything in this world to bring his daughter home is consuming. The performances work so well because they're so raw. It's one of my favorite Hugh Jackman performances, and I honestly wish people talked about it more. At no point do any characters act in ways that aren't entirely understandable. They might be crazy, they might be brutal, but you can always see why they do what they do, feel what they feel. But it's not the kind of film you cheer for either. You don't identify with the characters because you want to, you identify because you can't help it. You can't help feeling what these characters feel, despite the fact that at times you don't want to. It's still one of my favorite Villeneuve films, though at this point it's hard to choose winners and losers because, let's face it, they're all winners in my eyes. But you knew that already. The film narrows the sight on real people and terrifying problems and forces the viewer to spend time in uncomfortable physical and mental spaces, something Denis touches on frequently in several films, but I'm not sure he's ever done it so keenly as in Prisoners. It's why, despite the film being his first English language endeavor, it's still so potent. Maybe it's because later down the line, Denis went on to create films with much broader scopes through increasingly foreign lenses. And while the personal touch is never something his films lack, it's easy to see how it can become overshadowed by the glamour of future projects. Prisoners is a masterclass in building tension and keeping it. The film builds and builds until you find yourself holding your breath for long stretches, only releasing when it's absolutely necessary. But enough about Prisoners. I probably should have made a whole piece on the film, or really, all Denis films, but YOLO, am I right? Might as well slap it all together in one big passion project and see what happens. Put a pin in the tension subject though, because we'll come back to it later. This signature tension might be the through line of Denis' body of work. So after Prisoners came Enemy. Released in the same year, and though the film received its share of accolades, also led by the great Jake Gyllenhaal, I won't spend much time on it. Not because it isn't a great film, but because I have to make choices on what I want to talk about, and Enemy is a whole can of worms to discuss on its own. I didn't watch it when it came out. I wasn't aware of it and thus missed it. But after becoming more accustomed to Villeneuve's work, I returned to it. But remember when I asked about the first Villeneuve film you ever saw? Well, what came next? For me, it was Sicario. Funny enough, in 2015 when the film released, I was still woefully unaware of Villeneuve, and only significantly after watching and adoring the film did I realize this was the same man who directed Prisoners. Yes, back then I was still a teenager, and though my love for film was strong, I paid significantly less attention. Sicario. Villeneuve's atmospheric dive into the world of drug cartels and corrupt politics. There are 100 things to be said about the film, but like I'm always reminding you, this isn't a review, and I don't want to get bogged down in recounting a bland synopsis of every film, or detailing how great every performance or shot is. These things are all true, and you can assume most performances and shots in Villeneuve films are indeed great. But nothing I can say will be better than experiencing the film for yourself, so I encourage you to do so if you haven't. Sicario builds on the tension established in Prisoners with unbelievable tenacity. The film follows a similar pace, gripping your cheeks and holding your face to the screen despite the moments you might want to look away. But I can't spend this entire piece talking about Sicario alone, though now I'm wondering if I should have. If you want a future video focused entirely on Sicario, comment below and tell me. Emily Blunt, Benicio del Toro, and Josh Brolin are all standout performances, but the scene I want to draw attention to in order to illustrate my point is the very first one. Sicario's opening scene is one that, to this day, I return to. It contains the first images that come to mind when I recall the film, and I'll go ahead and spoil the reason. I remember the first scene because of how it made me feel. Are you seeing a pattern here? Let's dig deeper. Sicario opens on an iconic yet simple shot overlooking an Arizona neighborhood. An unassuming establishing shot, but that's only until our SWAT team enters the frame from the right and the camera begins its slow pan and the score rises from beneath the mix among nature, the soft breeze, and careful footsteps to settle on one specific house. They have the house surrounded, but it doesn't matter whose house it is to you at this point, because you're already subconsciously tense. The tension begins in the first shot and won't release one iota until the scene is through. Next, we see a sliver of window from inside the house as shadows dance by. The subtle, simple genius of Roger Deakins. Then we introduce our viewpoint character. She's tense. Moisture pools on her face. The scene is still uncomfortable and growing even more still, but Emily Blunt does nothing at all. No words, no gestures, no flamboyant establishing traits at all. The establishing trait is her, just sitting in the tension, giving away nothing. The truck speeds up and the winding pitch crescendos as the house nears until the tension breaks with the audio for excruciating seconds, only to introduce another level as the truck bursts through the wall. The house raid plays out like you'd expect. The SWAT team shouts, they point guns at everyone in the home. They ask, "Where are the hostages?" And Emily Blunt announces, "FBI, don't move!" Before entering a room to encounter a gunman that lets a shotgun shell loose to whiz by her head before she neutralizes the attacker in a burst of gunfire, splattering the wall behind with blood. The music dissipates, but the tension doesn't. You see every indication that the commotion is over, but you don't feel that indication in your bones. I want you to hold on to that idea, feeling it in your bones. Because I'm not trying to explain away every Denis Villeneuve film on the planet. I'm trying to figure out the difference between a great film, a great director, and the one that changes everything. I'm talking about tension right now, hyper-focused on it. But the concept fits into the broader picture as the ability to make you feel something so deeply, but in a way that's unique to this man. But let's go back and finish the scene. No music taints the tension for lingering moments before Daniel Kaluuya notices a hole in the wall. The look on his face does all the tension building for you before the music creeps back in and the team tears the wall apart to find bodies. The next shot is Emily Blunt, along with most of her team outside puking their guts up. The weight of what they discovered. Time passes as more officials arrive on the scene, and we seemingly move forward into a new phase of the scene, but the sound design doesn't, really. For some reason we can't put our finger on, we're still stuck in the tension from the moment Daniel Kaluuya gazed into the wall. We feel gross. Denis receives no shortage of praise for the production on all his films, but outside of awards, sound design never really gets the credit it deserves in my eyes. From complex to simple, unique to commonplace, Denis films always carry a similar weight. He goes from thrillers to science fiction epics, but they still feel similar somehow. The sound design often keeps me engaged more than the award-winning performances and shots. As the scene continues, Denis utilizes a lack of any prominent musical notes, opting for minimalism to do the heavy lifting for him. Something he does often, allowing the viewer to work through intense scenes where the lack of music almost feels like something is missing, which induces even more curiosity. Musical swells fade in and out across the scene, bringing you back in, beckoning you to take a breath before disappearing again, just when you need them most, until the moment you least expect. Blunt steps outside, and the outdoor shed comes into view for only a split second before exploding. The explosion emerges from near complete silence. Nothing I can say will ever do justice to big-budget film production design in any way, because, well, obviously, I'm not a big-budget film production designer, so I won't try to win you over with any technical mumbo-jumbo. I'll remain in the place I began, how it made me feel. After Sicario, Villeneuve's skyward trajectory was set in stone, and all us commoners needed do was wait and watch. At the time when Arrival came out, it felt as though Denis finally peaked. And maybe he did, but I don't have time to break down all my favorite scenes from every movie he's ever made. Arrival, starring Amy Adams and Jeremy Renner, adapted from the 1998 Ted Chiang short story, needs no accolades from me. All the big dogs handed them out to this film like hotcakes in 2016. In short, the film was nearly perfect. At the time, it felt like a culmination of everything Denis had been leading towards. It felt like a pinnacle. To this day, I'm not sure Villeneuve has drawn the line so finely between heart and personal connection to story brought to life with breathtaking character portrayal and atmospheric sci-fi world building. Both are executed in this film to a baffling degree, and if Denis spends the rest of his career chasing the high that Arrival provided, few directors will rival his accomplishments. even if he never tops this one. But obviously, it's 2021 now, and Denis has only continued charging forward, and Arrival might seem like a stepping stone fading into the past to some. I'd like to take a moment to draw the magnifying lens to something else at this point, though. A cursory glance at Villeneuve's filmography will tell you what films he's had a hand in writing and which films he's only directed. Now, obviously, it's nearly impossible for any director to not have a hand in writing any film that they're involved in, but you get what I mean. These writing credits are important to me because while Blade Runner 2049 is arguably my favorite Villeneuve film, that doesn't make it perfect by common measure. It contains some of my favorite scenes, my favorite score, and favorite cinematography, as well as plays to my love of science fiction and fantasy. But I can't help wondering if this was the place at which Denis became indulgent to a degree. And while we are already in love with his directorial style, it's easy for bloat to occur. That said, I won't claim Blade Runner is bloated. It's long, slow, and brooding from start to finish, and I like that type of film. I don't mind sitting through the long silences, lingering in their heavy air. That said, Blade Runner didn't exactly kill it at the box office. Denis has had the privilege of working with some phenomenal writers. Prisoners by Aaron Guzikowski, Enemy by Javier Gulan, Sicario written by the legend Taylor Sheridan, who also wrote Hell or High Water and Wind River, two phenomenal films. Arrival was adapted by Eric Heiserer. I mean, what did we do to deserve such amazing team-ups? Also, I'm just going to go ahead and throw this out there. I probably just butchered at least 3 of those names, so let's ignore every single pronunciation for the sake of moving on. Many up-and-coming directors get thrown under the bus by weak writing, and thus never get the chances they deserve. Jordan Vogt Roberts, anyone? But Denis has been standing on the shoulders of giants for years now, and that's not a knock at all either. He deserves every bit of it. That said, the 2 largest criticisms of both Blade Runner 2049 and Dune are pace-related. They're mostly writing-based. To be entirely fair, Blade Runner 2049 and Dune are incredibly hard stories to tell. They aren't contained in ways that films like Prisoners and Enemy are. They juggle arguably more elements than previous films and thus struggle to remain grounded and focused. And I don't think that makes them lesser films by any means, but they do create problems for casual viewers. I won't go out on a limb and slander writers involved in any Villeneuve films, but I will say that some have better writing than others. Or maybe a better word for it, some are tighter than others. But Blade Runner 2049 is still my favorite in his filmography, and yes, even after Dune Part 1. It was the most indulgent of his films at the time from a perspective of soundtrack, cinematography, set design, world building, and lofty conceptual grounding, though obviously I won't deny Arrival is a very close second. I'd like to tie all this together in a nice bow to explain how Blade Runner is the proper culmination of Denis' body of work, simply because it's my favorite, but honestly, it isn't. Not yet. I love it for personal reasons. The Vegas ruins, the hologram scene, the water fight, the closing shot. I could go on for hours, but as much as it pains me to say this, Blade Runner isn't the culmination of everything Denis has worked for. Dune, however, might be. It pains me to be forced to leave a caveat on this subject, but I think it's a necessary one. We have to face the truth. Dune is only one part of his story. I've seen some viewers complain about how the film ended, or how little they felt happened during its 2.5-hour runtime. I loved every second of Dune. I was constantly immersed, gripped by the film, but can't help feeling it lacked a personal touch. One that was always so prevalent in previous films. One I'm holding out to find in the second part. Don't get me wrong, the performances were phenomenal. The story is told with such tact that it blows my mind to think about. Denis managed to make some hard-to-digest world-building and political landscapes somewhat easier to follow. He paid dues to the source material in ways many directors simply wouldn't. He's on the record saying over and over how he only wanted to do the film if he could do it right. That's why we're getting 2 parts instead of 1 in the first place. So I'm forced to view Dune Part 1 as just that. Half a movie. Half a story. Dune is breathtaking. Oscar Isaac embodies Duke Leto's royal heir. Stellan Skarsgård unsettles as Vladimir Harkonnen. Timothée Chalamet is a nearly unrivaled new talent. And I'll honestly watch anything with Josh Brolin in it. And that's not to forget all the other amazing casting choices either. Only there isn't time to heap praises onto them all. Past that, the film contains some of the best cinematography I've seen in forever. Like, no really, I want at least 30 shots from the film framed on my walls. But despite the film clocking in over 2.5 hours, it somehow feels rushed in parts. There are sequences that feel like they're missing scenes or a few extra shots, but with a film so broad in scope, I have trouble heaping any criticism atop it, because I think it's important to pay all due respect to just how massive an undertaking a project like this is. Despite how in love I've been with the film since the trailers released what feels like forever ago now, shoutouts to endless delays, and despite how much of the film I spent in awe of the craftsmanship, Dune didn't make me feel very much. Not for the story. I felt for Denis, I felt the set pieces, for the love with which it was made, but I never quite connected with its characters. Never quite felt the plight of its people. Maybe if this was the end and part 1 was all we got, I'd include that as a bullet point on my list of pros and cons to the movie. But as of right now, I can't help reserving judgment. So many seeds were planted in part 1. So many threads received the lightest tugs. I can only hold out grandiose hope that Denis will pull it all together in part 2 and blow our socks further off than he did with part 1. But I can't continue without acknowledging that the original Dune text from Frank Herbert wasn't the most personal of stories either. Dune is about something more. But unfortunately, with half a story, we're left with our jaws on the floor. We're still holding our pee in the movie theater because we don't want to miss a scene. It's been 2.5 hours and somehow we're left wanting more. I'm not the only one that didn't exactly connect with the emotional tug of the film either. I've spoken to friends who feel similarly and even seen other YouTubers voice the same. But I'm not going to levy this as criticism because if you go back and review each scene from the film, Denis took extra care to retain that same personal touch all his movies have. He does spend time with Paul and Lady Jessica. He does illustrate their plight. Maybe Paul's journey just isn't as relatable as, say, Hugh Jackman in Prisoners, but I'm more inclined to think this disconnect is no fault of Villeneuve's. I think despite the groundwork that was laid, all the payoffs await us in part 2, and without them, we're left with open doors we can't walk through yet. Villeneuve has spent his entire career on the tightrope, juxtaposing the micro and the macro with dazzling poise. But with Bladerunner 2049's box office stumble, there's been a lingering question. Can he move into the realm of franchise blockbusters? Does he even want to? Despite my love for Blade Runner 2049, it wasn't the follow-up to Arrival some, especially the studio execs, were hoping for. Handing him Dune was a big risk. Despite the faith I've always had in his ability, his deep respect for cinema and meticulous care isn't exactly what brings in the big bucks. As we've all learned over the past decade, many casual viewers want TV quality, copied and pasted, superhero movies, farted into our streaming services every 6 months, and that's enough. Dune Part 1 left me with far more questions than answers. Until now, he's never helmed a sequel. He's maintained a perfect balance between spectacle and intimacy through every film until now. Dune Part 1 was the first Villeneuve film in which I walked away with no real emotional attachment to the plot or its characters. I watched the film more for Villeneuve than I did for the story itself, something that was never the case with his previous films. But we didn't get a complete arc. Nothing is through yet. A cynical type might speculate that Denis' balance is slipping, that Dune was an impossible task from the start, and the legend finally faltered, finally found a monster he couldn't slay. But I can't be pessimistic. I'll hold my tongue until part 2, and for now, I'll love Dune for what it is. A piece of art. A slice of a world we'll never come any closer to. And in the end, that's why I love stories, why I love fantasy and science fiction with all my heart. I want to experience new worlds. I want to feel something. I'm tired of watching films once, casting offhanded judgment, and moving on with my life. Tired of being stuck inside with streaming services, scrolling through Instagram during the slow bits. I want to immerse myself in art. I want to breathe it in. I want to return to the places I found sparks and light a fire. What I'm saying is, I want to watch Dune again. I hope this piece convinced you to go rewatch your favorite movie and stop checking Rotten Tomatoes scores before every new release. Have a good night.